It's wonderful to see you all here this evening, even a rainy evening, that you would come out for this talk, and really pleased to be here. I wanted to say a few things about the talk tonight. The topic, as I imagine it, is resilience. How do we make our children stronger? Strong enough to live in an uncertain world, right? Because that we know is going to be the case for them. And to live in a world that's complex and problematic without easy answers. So you have to have a certain stamina to wade into problems. How do we prepare them for that? And what I'd like to do tonight is to speak to you in two ways. One is just how do we strengthen our children constitutionally? How do we just make them healthy? Because healthy children, like healthy plants, can weather a storm. And so we want that. But then in addition, how do we help our children meet the crises that they'll inevitably meet? Society's crises, environmental crises, personal crises. How do we meet those in a way that makes us more than we were before? How do we meet them in a way that defines us? Because that's what crises do. So I'm going to begin. And what I want to begin by saying is that I was a teacher at the Waldorf School in Washington, D.C., and I ended up taking 4 classes from first grade to 8th grade. And I loved it. And people say to me, "Oh, that's amazing. You taught that 4 classes." And I said, "But you know why I had to do that? It's because I'm a slow learner." And so if you stick around long enough, you get the lessons you're supposed to get. And I want to tell you about one lesson that I gained one day completely by surprise. At our school at Halloween, we had a tradition that children could dress up in a costume that was related to anything they'd studied. And what the 8th graders knew is that they studied the modern world, which meant they could come as anything they wanted, which was a risky proposition. And this class that I had, they lived into this. And so they came in all sorts of surprising costumes, and you bring the children up and they stand on a stage like this in a sort of an arc, and everybody gets to see them and you introduce them. And I got to this one girl in my class, and I just looked at her. She came as Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz. She had on ruby red Doc Martens. Those were her magic slippers. She had a little basket with her bunny Toto, and she had a little Judy Garland type dress on. And I looked at her and I go, "Oh my gosh, I get it. Being a Waldorf teacher is like being in Oz," right? You start out, and all these little children, they're like little munchkins. They speak with a high voice. And if you're the teacher, they'll follow you anywhere. It's like follow the yellow brick road. And, lions and tigers and bears, oh my, and off they go. And it's very sweet, and they treat you as if you're the all-knowing Oz in first grade. They have a dispute about a stick, and they come to you and they say, "I had this stick, I left it right by that tree yesterday, and Jeffrey took it today, and he won't give it to me." And then you look at them and you say, "Well, Jeffrey, we're going to let Charles have it for 15 minutes, and then I'll call you, and then you can have it for 15 minutes. And they were fine. The all-knowing Oz had spoken. In first grade, that works. In the later grades, it doesn't work at all like that. And so you take the children on this journey from first grade to 8th grade, and in 4th grade, you get to that place where the angry, grumpy trees are, right? The ones where, "Don't pull that apple from me. How would you like if somebody did that to you?" Right? They get a little grumpy in 4th grade. And in 6th grade, the evil monkeys come, right? Where they're sort of talking behind each other's back, and there's all this gossip. 7th grade, to me, was always like the poppies. My 7th graders yawned more than any human beings I met in my face, as if what I was saying only made them sleepy. Please pick your head up. You know, you're here to learn. And the only thing that would rouse them was snow. The chance that school would close early or be closed tomorrow, wide awake. Right? And then in 8th grade, you get to Oz, and they realize that you're just this man behind the curtain. You don't know anything. You're just pulling levers with smoke, and you know, and they you can hear the refrain: "Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain," right? And they don't. They pay much more attention to each other, you know. And there you are. You come to the end of this journey, and you know they're ready to say to you, you know, you're the great and all-knowing Oz, but you're a fraud. I came here to get a brain, the Scarecrow will say, and the Tin Man will say, and I came to get a heart, and the Lion will say, and I came to find courage, and Dorothy will say, you know, I need to go home to Kansas. And what you realize is that's exactly what the children have been given by their Waldorf education. They've been given an education that has developed those 3 capacities: the capacity for clear thinking that the Scarecrow wanted, the capacity for warm-hearted interaction with whatever you meet in life, which the Tin Man wanted, and courage, which is this perseverance and resilience that on a bodily nature that we want our children to have. And so you see that these 3 aspects from The Wizard of Oz, those are the 3 ways we want to strengthen our children. And that's what the school's trying to do. And honestly, that's what we should be doing as parents, strengthening our children. Now, this courage part of the Lion, that's connected with something in the Waldorf School we call willpower. And willpower is not so well understood. The best definition for willpower that I've encountered was from Garrison Keillor with his powder milk biscuits. It's the strength to get up and do what needs to be done. Right? We know what that is. That's just this, all right, I'm going to do it. You just get yourself off the couch and you get up and you do it. I read a piece once about a man who, when he was in college, he had a side business where he would help students move furniture from dormitory to dormitory. And he'd come home that night to his dormitory room, and he was sitting in his chair bemoaning the state of the world, just bemoaning it, and thinking whatever is going to come of our country, our society, our world. And he said he knew that if he just got up and walked down 3 flights of stairs and closed the windows on his truck, his thinking would change. Right? You get up and you do the right thing, and all of a sudden your mindset shifts. And that's willpower, the ability to get up and do the right thing. And how do we help our children with the development of willpower? We do it quietly, and it starts early. I do a lot of work with dads, and often when we meet, I'll just see what kind of questions they have. And one of the questions the dads have been known to ask goes something like this: would you please tell me how it happens in the kindergarten that Miss Carol just sings a song and all the children start to clean up? Right? How does that happen? How do we give children the practice of cleaning up their toys just through a song? Now, we know it doesn't happen magically. We know it happens because day after day, the teacher has sung that song and gone to the children with this embrace of, we are going to clean up now. It's the we for the young child. We're going to pick up those toys. It can't be from a distance. I know you had Kim Payne speak here last year, and I know Kim will tell you, you've got to enter their world if you want them to do what you ask. You can't call from the kitchen while you're stirring something and say, please clean up your toys, because they won't do it, right? You have to go and become part of their world, and that's what the kindergarten teachers will do. They'll just go with the children. Now we clean up. And they're singing, and the children are imitating what they're doing. They start picking up the blocks, and the children start picking up the blocks, and they round up the stragglers, and this is day one. And then the next day after free play, the same song, the same embrace, the same practice, and it goes on day after day after day. And we realize it's not just the children's will that's getting strengthened. It's the adults. In order for us to teach our children how to have a strong, resilient will, we have to demonstrate for them the things that we want them to do. And so we take this on as teachers. It's the same place with the snack table. People marvel, how is it you have 12 preschool children sitting together, waiting to be fed, and they're hungry, and they wait until everyone's served? Right? That's major. How do you do that? The same way, day after day. The practice of passing the plate with the bread, taking your portion, passing it on. And the children learn these practices. These become our habits. And that's what we're always working with our children. It's the habits. Now, I don't know how it happens that our children are much better at learning bad habits than good ones. They are, right? But that's our work. And often that work, it happens in various ways and at difficult times. You know, I always say to parents, you know, do you have friends that don't have children? Can you just imagine what their life is like on Sunday morning? Right? They can sleep as late as they want. They can they can go out for a latte and have a conversation that isn't interrupted, right? You've chosen a better path. You're on a path to sainthood. You're learning all sorts of really wonderful human qualities like self-sacrifice and, you know, and empathy, and, you know, because you give to your children. And so here we are with our children, and we give them everything we have, right? For more hours of the day than we would really choose to do it if we had a choice, right? And we teach them things, and there are parts of the day that are really hard. Dinner time is universally hard, right? Leaving the house in the morning for school, not an easy assignment, right? Bedtime, not an easy assignment. And so we have these difficult assignments, and it's not like we don't do anything else the rest of the day. Right? So if you're coming home from work and now you've got to get your children ready for bed, you know, you've already given up a lot of your good energy for work, and you've got to go into a reserve to have the presence of mind and the patience and the inclination to actually get up and do this. Let's get them ready for bed. And it's all habits again, isn't it? And it's just like it asks for incredible imagination. So when your child takes off their clothes and just drops them on the floor, you know, where do we find the wherewithal to say, oh, is that where your pants sleep? They don't really sleep there. Let's let them sleep on the chair here. You pick them up, and yes, please turn them right side out and let them sleep on the chair. Is that where your shoes sleep? No. Let those shoes walk over here to the corner and sleep right here next to your pants. And, you know, you have all that. And you have to teach them how to get washed. You have to teach children that the towel actually goes back on the towel rack, right? The toothpaste cap it actually screws back on the toothpaste. You know, and you're doing this. It's all habits. And it's all willpower. And eventually, if we're really fortunate, somewhere around the age of 7 or 8, our children will say, can I just get myself ready? And then you can't pump your fist and stand up and shout, yes, go for it. You just quietly say, and do you know everything you should do? Right? So you do that. So we prepare them for bed, but we all know that bedtime doesn't usually just end when we blow out the candle or finish singing a song. Sometimes our children wake. And they wake with a nightmare, or they wake with thirst. And we have to figure out how to go to them so we don't create the pattern that they just become accustomed to waking at the same time every night. I mean, honestly, who wouldn't want to wake up and be held and sung to? Right? I mean, you don't have to be swift to figure that one out, right? And if I'm going to get fed also, like, this is a no-brainer, right? So we don't want to accustom our children to depleting our energy more than they already do. But what we have is this question of what do we do when our children wake up? What do we do when they're worried? What do we do when they're afraid? Now, I want to tell you a story. It's from a book by a woman named Wendy Mogul. She's a really good author. She wrote a book called Blessings of a Skinned Knee, using Jewish traditions to raise self-reliant children. And in it, she tells the story of going to a private school in Southern California. Now, we already know where this is headed because it's Southern California, right? And she loves this little private school. It's the kind of private school where the little fountains are all child size, and they have hand-painted tiles behind the fountain. And she says, the parents there all get my jokes, and she just loves speaking there. And she said one day she was giving a talk, and a woman in the audience raised her hand and said, I don't know what to do. Ever since my daughter's friend was injured in the earthquake, my daughter wakes up crying every night. And she's scared. And she said, and how do you know that she's scared? Does she tell you? And the woman said, no, my housekeeper tells me. And she said, well, how does your housekeeper know? She said, well, she sleeps with my daughter. And she said to her, you mean you have a human teddy bear? And she said, and the woman laughed. She took it in a good way. She had hired the housekeeper. That was part of her job description, was that she would sleep with her daughter. And Wendy Mogul said that when she left the talk, she kept thinking about this woman, and she thought, what was her story? Had she been a descendant of someone who was in the Holocaust, and that left a scar on her emotionally? Was she the victim of some violent act? And then Wendy Mogul thought, no, this is the way parents are becoming. They're so nervous about their children's well-being that they compensate in unusual ways. A mother will know that a child is stressed because she has ballet practice and a social studies report, and the mother will go to the library and do the social studies report for the child so the child can go to ballet. Or another parent will be worried that at recess their child struck out in a pickup wiffle ball game, so they'll hire a sports tutor to teach the child to hit. She said everybody's so nervous that she had the feeling that if the exodus from Egypt occurred today, no one would go. What guarantee do we have that this Moses fellow knows what he's doing? How do we know we're going to get to the promised land? So you take an event that defined a culture, and if it happened today, it wouldn't be a defining moment. And she worried that we're weakening our children by the worry we have. We weaken their wills. Children watch parents continually. Studies show that if a toy is brought into the presence of a young child, 2-year-old, that child will look at the parent's face before deciding how it will react to that toy. And if the parent looks afraid, the child will be afraid. They watch us all the time. Our anxiety becomes theirs. Our children imitate everything they see. Our expression conveys so much of our worry. Our voice conveys so much of our worry. And so we burden our children because we give them a layer of anxiety from our reactions. And that's just through the doing, through something simple like sleeping through the night. Now, I want to move to the second capacity that comes from the Wizard of Oz, which is this capacity for feeling. This is an important one, especially for me as a class teacher in a Waldorf school, because that's our currency. We teach the children through their feelings. And we do it through art and music and poetry and storytelling, because we know that the heart of a child, a 7, 8, 9, 10, 11-year-old, it's just wide open. I'm convinced that children love their friends more at that age than we love anybody in life. Just love their friends. See, that it's true because that's why the phone went off. It'll do that if I say something that's true. Just so you know. It'll do that. And so we have our children, we want to educate their feeling life, but what we come to wonder about is, how do we do this? What Rudolf Steiner says is that our children are connected to us by invisible threads. They know what we're feeling. That's why your child can say to you, "What's wrong, Mommy?" when you're doing nothing different than you do usually. They just know. They know what we're feeling. And if they don't know it invisibly, they know it through our expression. They know it through our voice. They're connected to our feelings. And so here we have this assignment of how do we move our children through the things that they have to do each day and still keep our feeling life just warm, welcoming, equanimous. And that's not easy, given the stress that we're all under. Now, it's very beautiful here in Ashland. And I come from the other coast just outside of Washington, D.C. And you can imagine, with the political situation, we live in a pressure cooker. And that affects people. And so we're all stressed. And our traffic is stressful. And the sirens are stressful. And since 9/11, you can't walk anywhere that is a major public event without going through a metal detector, which is stressful. So you only have to wonder, what's this like for everybody and for our children? Right? So you just have that. It's just an atmosphere of anxiety. And that's what I saw in my classroom. You know, having started to teach in the 70s and just finishing my last class in 2015, if you said to me, "Do you see any changes?" And I'll say, children are so much more anxious today than they were before. And so you see this level of anxiety increasing. I think as a school, we have to do something to help our children. We have to strengthen them. And so if I'm going to strengthen their feeling life as a teacher or as a parent, I know there's something I need, and that's more time. If I have time, I'm so much nicer. Right? I want you to picture a scene. You're getting ready to leave for school, and you're 5 minutes early, and you just close the door, your children are out, you walk up to the car, and one of your children say, "I forgot my backpack." Right? If you're 5 minutes early, it's easy. All right, where was it? It was by the steps. I know, I did. I'm sure I asked you to pick it up, but let's go get it. You can do that, and it all stays calm. If someone was taking your blood pressure, it wouldn't have gone up. But if you do it and you're 3 minutes late, it all changes, right? And that's where the stress comes. And so what we need as parents and as teachers, we just need a little more time. Time, because time allows us to regulate our feeling life. As a teacher, you give me 5 extra minutes, my voice is just as sweet as could be, right? But if I'm rushed, my teeth, I start to grit them a little. Did I ask you to get your backpack? Did you just drop your coat right there? Please pick it up. It's not the same interaction. Whereas, give me 5 minutes more and I can turn to wonder, did you really just drop your coat? Oh my goodness. See, in my mind, I imagine that St. Francis always had 10 extra minutes. Right? That's why he's a saint. He just was so chill. But that's what we need as parents. We need that extra time. And yet, doesn't it always happen that we're 5 minutes late far more often than we're 5 minutes early? Bedtime when we're running late, it's just no fun. That's the night when you take your child's shirt off, they cry for no reason. Right? Just because you just took their shirt off. You hurt me. You wash their face, they cry. Because everybody just gets tense. And so we need to build in extra time because we want our children to experience our feeling life so that it nurtures them. And what we also know is that our feelings create our memories. Anything we experience with a shock of emotion stays with us forever. That's why you can remember like it was yesterday when your child was born. And that's why we all know where we were at 9/11. If you're as old as I am, you'll know where you were when Martin Luther King was shot. You just remember exactly where you were. The night, the weather, everything. Because the memories are just cemented by the feelings. And so it really behooves us. If we had a magic wand, we would create good memories with strong feelings at special times, like birthdays. Right? It's interesting. There are all these little mysteries in Waldorf education. Like Rudolf Steiner will say, between 7 and 14, the adults should be authorities. And I believe that. The parent should say, it's time for bed, right? Not, honey, do you want to go to bed now? Right? It's time for bed. Let me carry you, or I'll give you a ride. But authority really also means author. We're the authors of our lives. And it should be authentically us. What's important to us is what we should live. And so I always think, how do you want to author a birthday? What do you want it to be like? Right? People do a really good job. I read a book by a man who on the birthday would ask his children, what do you want to do? I'll do anything you want. His daughter said to him, I want to ride around on my bike around the neighborhood in my pajamas. And so he did it too, in his pajamas. Here's a man who runs an $80 million nonprofit that feeds a good portion of Africa. And there he is bicycling in his pajamas in his neighborhood. I love that. How do we want to celebrate our holidays? What are the traditions? Because how we mark time deepens feelings. I'll always ask fathers when I work with them, what's your best memory of your dad? And I get some good ones. Sometimes it was the annual camping trip because you did it every summer and you would bring the same food and you'd go to the same place. Or it was those mornings when we had to get up before the red lights were flashing. Before they were on, like you get up back east, you get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to go fishing and the street lights don't work. They're all on flash, like a stop sign instead of a red and green. And as a child, it leaves you with a lasting impression. Or the nights when you're out and you have to put your pajamas on before you got in the car, right? And you could fall asleep in the back seat. Those are sweet memories. And that's what you hear from people. They're still there, those memories. And so what we create through the marking of our year, that leaves the memories with our child. But there are other memories that come at moments of dramatic crisis. And they stay with our children too. And it creates a tremendous responsibility for us. There's a man named Dan Kinlan, really good writer. He wrote a book called Raising Strong Children in Tough Times. He wrote it after 9/11. And he wanted to know how people dealt with dramatic crises in their past. So he went to Europe to interview men and women who were children during World War II. And he interviewed this one woman who was 5 or 6 during the war. She had lived in London with her mother. Her father had gone off to the war. And London was bombed 137 days in a row. Can't imagine what that does to you when you hear the sound of those planes coming every night, and then the sound of the bombs, or the V-2 missiles that whistled until they got close. 3,000 people were killed in the fires from the bombing. 800 firemen lost their lives. And families moved out to the country to avoid the bombing. So this girl with her mother went to live with her aunts in the country. And one day, while they were in the house, the doorbell rang, and there was a Western Union messenger on a bicycle. And the mother went to the door and was given a telegram. Even the little girl knew at that moment that her father had died in the war. The mother came in, and she came into the house, and she said to the little girl, "Please get that big art book off the shelf." And she sat down with her daughter, and they just looked at the pages in the art book. And then, a little later, her aunt came home, and the mother went into the kitchen to speak to the aunt, and the girl could hear her mother crying. And her mother went to bed and stayed there for several days. But when she came back down, the girl said her mother had enabled them to carry on their life just the way it had been before. Nothing changed. They would eat their meals. They even celebrated Christmas. And she thought back to that when she was an adult. What kind of strength it must have taken for her mother to do that in the face of that heartbreak. She said to Dan Kinlan, she said, "I thought of my mother when I had my own crisis in my life." And he sort of asked her, "Well, what crisis did you have?" And she said, "My son. He was killed 2 years ago in a car accident up at Dartmouth. 4 people in a car. They weren't drinking, they just probably were going fast. He was the only one killed in the accident. Even the dog he held on his lap survived. And when it was hard for me, when I wanted to scream, when I was out shopping, stop what you're doing, don't you know what's happened? I would just think of my mother, and it would help me to get through." You see where we learn resilience. We learn it from our parents. We learn it by seeing how the adults in our lives respond to the events that come to everyone. So we have this responsibility. Our emotional response to a crisis is going to make a tremendous difference to our children. And when we're resilient, we teach them how to be resilient, how to weather the storm, how to move when the wind blows, but not be knocked over. Right? How to stand and keep standing, and then step forward and carry on. Right? It's what we want. Now, the third way that we want to strengthen our children is through their thinking. And I want to make a clear distinction between thinking and information. Our children have so much information, and honestly, they don't know what to do with it. I remember sitting with my daughter, she's now a grown young woman, and works in a school. She's an assistant principal out in the Bay Area. She was about 9. And she was sitting at the table. We were at the beach with friends, and the newspaper that came was the New York Times, and she was reading one of the columns. And she said, "Dad, is this true?" And I said, "What is it, David?" She said, "It says here that the sun is just a ball of exploding gas, a great nuclear furnace, and that one day it will explode and the universe as we know it won't be anymore. Is that true?" Now, they always tell you as a Waldorf teacher, don't answer the hard questions. Ask your child what they think. And I said, "Well, what do you think, Abe?" She said, "Of course not." Right? Because a child should not have to live with that information. Right? It doesn't serve anybody. And how do we presume to know? Right? The children should have a sense that the world we live in has some meaning and purpose, and that we're here for a reason. So we want to, rather than give them information, we want to help them think clearly. I remember when my oldest son, said to me, "Why do I have to study algebra? I'm never going to use this in my life." And I remember saying to him, I said, "You mean, when are you ever going to have a problem that you can't solve just the first time you look at it? And you have to use your thinking to kind of unravel it?" I mean, algebra, I love teaching algebra because it helps you to think. You take those word problems in algebra, the ones that we saw in high school, there's a triangle, the one side is 3 times the smaller side, the second side is 5 more than 2 times the smaller side, and the perimeter is 44 square feet or something like that, 44 feet, and find 3 sides. And you always have to ask yourself, what do I know? Well, I know that perimeter is I add the 3 sides. So there's my equation. X plus 3x plus 2x plus 5 equals. You just trust what you know. And that's what we have to do when push comes to shove. We just have to trust what we know. And that's part of the thinking resilience that we have. We have a high school at our Waldorf school, which essentially means that we've got 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th graders, which liven up our school environment dramatically. And in 12th grade, we have their commencement, their graduation. And one year, we had an author, a local author, who was a parent at our school, come to speak. And she starts her talk off. Her son had transferred to our school in 11th grade. He came from a high-powered prep school. And after a month in our school, he said to his mother, "Mom, I don't know how much you're paying for the Waldorf school, but you're wasting your money." She said, "Really? Why?" He said, "Well, we just studied Hamlet. We all read Hamlet. And you know what the teacher asks me?" He says, "What do you think?" And the teacher, the mother, said to the son, "Oh, no, maybe that's just Mr. Hall." "No, Mom, they're all like that. They want to know what I think." And that's what we should be doing with our young people. We should be asking them what they think. Why is Hamlet dressed in black? What do you think? We should do that, because the one thing college professors complain about now is that all college students ask is, "Please tell me what I need to do to get an A." Right? And the school that he came from, what they did was put it all on the board, what you should think about Hamlet. Right? Shakespeare's play, this is where it's set, this is what's going on, these are the main characters, this is the point of tension. You write it all down in your book, in your notes, and then when there's a test, you give it all back. But what do you think? You see, that's what we should be doing with our young people. Waldorf schools do that. They help our children think. It's what we should do as parents. We should be continually asking our children, "What do you think?" Because you know what they do. If you have teenagers at home, they react, but they mumble. Right? "Oh, it's stupid." "Yeah, but what do you think? Why is it stupid?" "Oh, because that guy's an idiot." Yeah, but why do you think, especially you have boys too, especially, it's like you've got to pull those thoughts out of them, it's like fishing. You just have to go for it. But you want to know what they think. And anytime we asked our daughter what she thought, she would tell you so clearly and moderately. She just would give you her opinion. And I found teaching 6th, 7th, 8th grade, the more I asked young people what they thought, the more they surprised me in a delightful way. They're so intelligent when you ask for that intelligence. In 8th grade, you study American history. 20th century is the last thing we studied. We studied World War II and the atomic bomb. We had to speak about that, but we had a boy in our class in 6th grade who was Japanese. And that was such an amazing conversation because the young people in the class loved him. And he loved them. And so to talk about something that was so tragic and painful in the history of his people and so dramatic in the history of our country, in a way where their tactfulness was apparent throughout. I was so impressed with them. And it was conversations like that we had about a variety of topics. Andrew Jackson and the Trail of Tears when the Cherokee were rousted out of the Smokies because the state of Georgia wanted that land for gold and silver. Dramatic response by the kids. You want that. You want to know what they're thinking. That's important. It helps them know who they are. And the one thing, I'll tell you truthfully, is what's always impressed me about Waldorf graduates is they know who they are. They have this sense of self. What a valuable thing. They leave high school and they know who they are. I spent 5 years in college, 5 years, mind you, finding out who I wasn't. Right? You want to know who you are. That's what the school will give young people by asking them, what do you think? What do you think about Hamlet? What do you think about Dante? What do you think about Faust? What do you think about Rilke? Just what do you think? It's a great exercise. We're not the only school that does that, but good schools ask kids what they think. Now, what the kids aren't so interested in is being burdened by what we think. So I'll tell you one more story. It's written in a book called Hunting for Hope. Really good writer. His name is Scott Russell Sanders. If any of you ever see the environmental periodical Orion, he's one of their editorial board members. He has articles in there. And he wrote this book, Hunting for Hope, because his daughter said to him, why should I have children? Why would you bring children into this world? And his son said to him, why should I go to college? The world will probably end before I graduate. And so he went looking to give his kids hope so that they could live a life the way he did, where the future held promise. Well, one of the things he writes about is a challenging relationship he had with his son Jesse. He said it's normal for teenage boys and their fathers to clash. But our clashing seemed to go deeper than just about soccer or the car. And I wanted to get to the root of the problem. So I agreed to go camping with Jesse. And he planned the whole trip. We were going up into the Rockies, and we were hiking. And we got to this place right below the snow line, and Jesse said, we're going to hike up above the snow line, Dad, and sleep on the snow. And he said, well, what's wrong with right here? And he said, no, I rented those really good sleeping bags that are good to a low temperature, and we've got our tent, and we should do it. And the father said, no, this is good here. What do we need? What do you need? You need avalanches? You need grizzlies? Let's stay right here. And he said, don't tell me you're wimping out, Dad. I'm not wimping out. I just think this is fine. He said, you always wimp out. You ruin everything. Those are words that strike home. You ruin everything. And so the son got really upset, and he started walking off. And the father is walking behind him. He could see his son's hair bobbing. He could see the sweat on his back and his backpack. And then suddenly his son stops, and around the corner come two old people, my age, with 3 grandchildren, with little canteens and little backpacks. And the older people have hiking sticks, and the son just looks, lets them pass, and says, "Yeah, this is wild, Dad. That's why they're grandparents with grandchildren hiking on this trail." And so the conversation is getting worse. And finally, they end up back at the car, and the son is still not talking. And the father says to him, "Is this how it's going to be? Are you just going to sit there and not talk? Tell me what's bothering you." And the son says, "You don't want to know." "I do want to know. I want you to tell me." He said, "I can't tell you." He said, "No, you have to tell me." He said, "Well, I'll tell you then. Your view of the world is totally bleak." He said, "How's that?" He said, "Well, we drive on the road and you see billboards and you see it as commercialization ruining nature. And we see a row of houses and you see development raping the earth. And all you see is the environmental crisis here and all the negative stuff there." And the father says, "What, none of that bothers you?" He says, "Of course it bothers me. But it's the world I have to live in. And you spit on it." "I don't spit on it," said the father. "You do, with your eyes. Your view of the world is totally bleak. And this is the world I have to live in." And that's the story for our kids. They've come to live in a world that is just challenging. And if you've got stubborn children, you know why they come like that. Because if they're going to change the world, they're going to have to be stubborn. They've chosen a very complicated time, but they've chosen it. And they've chosen you as their parents. And our job is to help them embrace their lives and stay safe. Right? Our job is to keep them safe, but we can't do it by, well, I'll give you an example. There's a saying by a physicist, Niels Bohr, Nobel Prize winner. He said that the opposite of an ordinary truth is false. But the opposite of a profound truth is often also true. So profound truth is good parents protect their children. You do that. You keep them from the street, you keep them safe, you keep them warm, you keep them fed, you keep them in dry clothes, you protect them. But the opposite is true. Good parents stop protecting their children. And that's what we're not doing today. We're trying to keep every difficulty out of the path of our children. And by doing that, we don't make them stronger. And so our job as parents is to let them fall. We know the difference in the two cries. Every parent does. You know the cry that really means something and the cry that's going to pass. Our children, when they're little, their natural gesture is to walk away from us and come back. They do that when you're sitting on a bench in a park. They walk away and they come back. And as they get older, they walk further. We want that gesture to continue. We want them to start to make their way. We want to trust that they're going to be okay. We should. We need to. Otherwise, we make them so apprehensive that they're looking over their shoulder instead of enjoying their life. We've got to let them go. I was at a talk once. The woman giving the talk said, a few years ago, she said, "Everybody who's over 40, raise your hands." And people raised their hands. She said, "You should all be dead. Because you roller skated without a helmet and knee pads." Right? You probably went in the car without a car seat. Maybe without a seatbelt, right? You drank out of a garden hose. Right? We have sanitized our children. And you know what they say medically? That the thing that most affects children illnesses is the dishwasher, because it gets everything so clean that the normal amount of bacteria that would build up a resistance in a child, an immunity, is washed away. We want our children to experience life's difficulties. It immunizes them. It helps them build immunity for the bigger problems. We want them to learn to make their way through them. But in order to do that, we need something else. And that's what Dorothy wanted. You need to find your way home. And I take that to mean that we need to find our spiritual place. Because when you have a spiritual center, you're at home anywhere you are. And when you're at home, you feel safe. We want to feel safe in this world. I'm going to go on that message that's in that movie Love Actually. You know where it ends in the airport, where Hugh Grant is saying, yes, I know people are talking all about the hatred in the world, but when I look, I see love everywhere. And I think that's getting lost. There's so much love in our world. The love of parents for their children, the love of grandparents for their children, the love of siblings for each other, even the love that arises for strangers in need. We just have to remember that this is a place that's still filled with love. And we have to bank on that and trust that. And you have a community that really actualizes that. And that's a great thing. We need not to forget that. And so whatever our spiritual path is, we should make sure we pay attention to it and let our children know. Let them know we're grateful. Let them know that we live in an amazing world where what science is showing now is how deeply we're all interconnected. How deeply we're all interconnected. How, when we meet, we connect on all sorts of levels. Right? We just do. Our heart perceives people. They say our gut perceives people. Our brain perceives people. We're just interconnected. And this world, it's an amazing place. Did you know that when the buffalo graze on a prairie, their saliva has a chemical that makes the grass grow back more quickly? That's how interconnected we are. It's our life. And so we need to just have this, so we hold it in our hearts and our children know. I love to end with two poems, both by Rilke, the German poet. One is just a small passage where he says the following: "And in the night, the heavy earth is falling. From darkness into loneliness we are falling. But there is one in whose hands holds this falling, whose hands hold this falling endlessly, gently." Right? Our earth is hurtling through space. The thought that it is just full of meaning. The last poem is one that I just wrote. Now, I didn't write it, I copied it in calligraphy for my daughter. And it says, "You mustn't be frightened if a sadness rises in front of you, larger than any you have ever seen. If an anxiety, like light and cloud shadows, moves over your hands and over everything you do, you must realize that something is happening to you, that life has not forgotten you, that it holds you in its hand and it will not let you fall." We'll all have crucible experiences. Those times when you're melted down and recast. They remake us. They say it's what great leadership is about. The way Steve Jobs remade himself after he was fired at Apple and went on to do so much more. There are just stories upon stories of people who did that. That's what we want to empower our children to be able to do. So whatever life brings them, they're strong enough to meet it and become more after it. So, thank you. And good luck with that. Good luck. You don't have to have questions. I'm okay with being done, if you are. Thank you. But if you have one that's pressing, I won't go away.
Could you just tell us who that poem is by?
Excuse me?
That poem
That one's by Rilke, and I think
Rilke.
it's from Letters to a Young Poet. It's from that.
Thank you.
It's a beautiful poem. I love it. Okay. Good. This is nice. Ah, there you go. Yes?
So for folks who are teachers, so stepping outside of the parent side,
Mm-hmm.
but are teachers particularly holding children rather than in a one-off setting where you have the children for at least a year, if not many years in a row. Do you have sort of some advice for how to hold those children in those moments that you do have them? Or any sort of coaching pieces when you're kind of inheriting?
Here's what I think. After 9/11, I would watch and see what people did. And what I noticed was that public radio they put a lot more poetry in their programs. There's something about a crisis that helps us understand poetry better. They had more music on. Music's important. So I would have music for children, I'd have singing, I would have poetry, and they said that people did much more handwork and gardening after 9/11 because when our hands are busy, we're soothed. I don't know what grade you're speaking of.
Kind of, they range from second grade up through fifth usually.
Yeah, I would teach children to knit. We have a school in Washington, D.C. It's a boarding school in the most difficult neighborhood in Southeast Washington. It's a seed school. It's a good school. And because it's a boarding school, the kids are there all day, and there's a lot of time for them. And one girl went in to see the art teacher, and the art teacher had on a beautiful scarf. And she said to the art teacher, "That's a lovely scarf. Where'd you get it?" And she said, "I made it myself." And she said, "You did?" She said, "Yeah, do you want me to teach you?" So she taught this girl how to knit. And then it just spread like wildfire the way it can in a dorm. All the children started to knit. They had trouble keeping everybody in yarn. They would be on their beds making blankets for their friends who were having babies. They called the article in the Washington Post a well-knit school community. But you see, there's something soothing. I'll tell you one more story. There was a public Waldorf school in Milwaukee in the 90s. It was the first public Waldorf school. It was in a very tough neighborhood. And one day, there was a shooting after school. And the principal knew the next day that she would have to talk to all the children at her school about what to do if they ever saw someone with a gun. And she went from class to class to class, speaking with the children, and now she was with the oldest children. And she was telling them, if you ever see anyone with a gun, or you ever see a gun, I want you to make sure that you give it to an adult. When one of the boys in the back of the room opened his desk, you know, one of those desks where the lid comes up, and he reached in, she said she caught her breath. And he took out his knitting, and he started to knit. And it's a perfect example of how self-soothing handwork is. This was something that he had to deal with, and that was how he dealt with it, by knitting. So there are things that really will help children, and that's what I would do. And the last thing is, I'm always looking for stories, because children love stories. And to find the right stories, Native American stories are great. But stories all over the world have been designed to teach children important lessons. And I would look for them. The kind of stories that let children know that people can weather challenges and come out on the right side in the end. And that's what usually stories do. So that's what I would do. At least, sometimes you don't know what to do, right? And you just have to do something. I always feel like you just have to get your foot in the door. So start with something, and I'm confident that you'll know what to do next. Yeah. Yep. Yes?
I have another teacher-related question. So, as teachers, we hold our students like a family, and we keep them in this place of love and beauty. But often we see the anxiety coming from home. And as Waldorf teachers, the parents are part of our classroom family. How do you hold the parents who are anxious about
This is good. That's the question that I've been asking myself. We just ran a conference on resilience last weekend, and that was the question I wanted to ask the teachers that were there. Because what I want to know is what lives inside my parents to make them so worried. And one of the young teachers said to me, well, look what the future holds for their children. College education, they're going to have a loan that they won't be able to pay off forever, right? The environment is in terrible shape. They won't be able to buy a house probably because the market will be so high priced, and they probably won't be able to get a really good job. And so parents are just worried because this is what portends in the future. And so if you think of what parents are carrying, then you can see how the general stress of that leads to the anxiety that is so prevalent today. And it's cultural too, right? And so I think that the first step is to understand our parents, because once we begin to understand what lives inside our parents' concerns, then we can begin the conversation. And if you have the good fortune of having a class for more than a year, it becomes an ongoing conversation. Otherwise, it has to become a school conversation, where as a team, we know we're going to pay attention to this issue, and we're all going to work together over time to help reassure our parents. And I don't know that we're going to make it go away, but I think we can begin to help. I really do. But I think we have to understand them. Is what's going on? I think that's the first step. Yeah. It's not easy what we're asked to do. It's really not. But isn't that the question we carry for so many of our children? What's going on? Yeah. It's good questions. I'll finish with one thought. And I think it's an important thought. I went back and took a 4th class. I can't tell you how difficult my 4th class was. Children pay no attention to reputation. They don't care. Experienced teacher, doesn't matter, right? It was so difficult that I wouldn't even have known how to tell my colleagues that I thought I made a mistake, right? That kind of difficult. And whenever I hit a difficult place, my reflex is always to look for something to read. Years ago, we used to have those radios with the little arrow that would move straight up and down when you were really tuned in. I always feel like my inner arrow is like always wavering off center. So I need something to align me. So I open up a book. Well, I had this book on my shelf that someone had told me to buy half a dozen years before. I never opened it. So I took it off the shelf. It's a book called Rudolf Steiner in the Waldorf School. It was all the talks he gives. He gave amazing talks to the children at assemblies and to the parents at parent meetings. And in it, he's talking to the parents, and he said, you know, most of us are asked to love 3 or 4 people in our lives. Our spouse, our children. But teachers are asked to love so many more. And as teachers, we all need more love. And this is just another example. It's not only our children that we need more love for, but it's for our parents and for our society, because our society's just pumped up fear. And that's what it does on every TV show. And so we need more love to help our parents. Well, the other thing I think is that if you were turning to the spiritual world, who would be more deserving of help than teachers and parents? Right? You know, teachers, we don't do it for the money. Right? We do it for the good of the world. It's a worthy cause. I would think the spiritual world would help. Yeah. Thank you for your question. Thank you all for the evening. Thank you. Thanks for coming.